All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Eggleston, and I run Course Report, which is a resource for students who are choosing a coding boot camp. If you haven't looked at Course Report yet, this is my one shameless plug. You can use our directory to find schools that fit your learning style, all of your needs. You can check out our blog for interviews with students and instructors and founders at boot camps around the world. And if you've been researching coding boot camps, then you've definitely thought about the types of jobs that you might get after you graduate. Two of the most popular jobs, I think, for boot camp grads are definitely web developer and software engineer. But you might have also thought to yourself, like, are these jobs the same? Are the two job titles used interchangeably? Is one job harder to get than the other? And of course, you've probably asked yourself, are the salaries different? All of those very good questions. But today, Gregorio Rojas, who is the co-founder and head instructor at Sabio, which is a coding bootcamp in California, is here to talk us through those two job titles, how web development and software engineering are similar and different, and how you can navigate job listings to understand which job you're qualified for. So Gregorio, thank you so much for being here, first of all.
Liz, thank you very much for having me. Always great to chat with you.
Of course. Well, let's start here. I mean, you've had a pretty rich career in software engineering and web development. So in your career, have you ever been a software engineer or a web developer or both?
Yeah, I've actually had probably both titles and acted as both. If there's a distinction, yeah, I've done a lot. I've done a lot of it. I've been in the industry since '99. So I've probably held unofficially a title of pixel pusher as well. A lot of stuff from the very, very, very front, where the users make contact with the application, all the way to the back where we're just dealing with ones and zeros. Absolutely.
Okay, so to start with the basics, what is a software engineer?
So if we're talking in a bubble, right, what is an engineer and what is a developer? An engineer is going to be someone very close to the hardware, building a lot of different tools that deals with like maybe ones and zeros, literally like binary stuff, just ones and zeros, trying to optimize at that level pieces of software that are going to be used by other people. The design of how we're going to do that, how we're going to do that efficiently, effectively, to support whatever it is that we need to support, whether it's speed and or load, is something that we would say like that person is an engineer. And the things that an engineer builds, which is probably really far away from a user, is what maybe, is on the other side of the spectrum, what a developer might be.
All right, so I'm hearing that software engineers are going to be working more closely to hardware, maybe working with some memory management, efficiency, designing the approach to some of these software systems, but maybe a little bit further away from the actual user. And what is a web developer?
Again, in a vacuum, right? When we talk about, okay, really, what is a web developer in a vacuum, if you will remove all the bias and all the funkiness that gets inserted, it used to mean very much like you were building a web page. But now, you have web developers. Maybe you're just building APIs that are meant to be accessed via a web technology, some type of web protocol that we're used to. And so that is, web developer. Very easily, you can think of someone who's going to be building stuff for a browser, accessible via a browser. But one of the things that we're going to talk about today that I want to talk about in Surface is that those terms kind of don't mean what the actuality is. The way people use them today, they're not really being used in that manner.
So can these roles just be used like interchangeably by different companies, or is there any kind of uniformity across job titles in the industry at this point?
Well, I think the problem that we get into when we talk about the differences in titles is that it's chaos right now. A lot of industries have very specific titles for very specific tasks, right? There's a lot of industries are really good about that. If you practice computer science, man, it's a complete free for all. So there is no rhyme to reason. In some places, they don't even have engineers. They don't have developers. They have application analysts. So it's really difficult to talk about what is a web developer, what is a software engineer. And what it comes down to is that there's a lot of folks that I see that try to make a hierarchy out of, an engineer somehow has a job that's harder than a web developer, which for anyone who's ever had to do some complex CSS, really hard CSS that has to be cross-browser across, I don't know how many different browsers across how many different operating systems, that stuff is hard, right? That stuff is really hard. When I've had to do it, I've longed for the days where I just deal with ones and zeros, because those guys behave. In comparison to CSS, it's like a 3-year-old.
And I mean, you mentioned that the hierarchy in the real world puts this like software engineer above a web developer. And I mean, we see that in salaries too, right? Do you all see that at Sabio, that folks that are getting software engineer title jobs are getting higher salaries than web developer? Because I think in the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's like $75,000 a year average for web developer versus like 100 for software engineer.
I mean, look, you quoted national statistics, so yeah, that makes sense. But when you get down to a specific company, it goes out the window. I have a developer that I was talking to the other day, but she's getting paid $150,000 to write React, and React code that runs in a browser. They're not allowed to go in the back end. They're not building tools. They're not building infrastructure. They're not doing any of that stuff. And I'm sure if we looked up her responsibilities, whether she's a developer or an engineer, based on these statistics that you're claiming, I'm sure she would fall into the developer role. But she's getting paid 150 grand. And I have a lot of people in that position that I know don't have an engineering title. They have, application developer as a title. And, it's like things like that where you have to kind of let go of the ideas of what you think an engineer is and what a developer is, because the important thing, one of the things here is that sometimes you see the word engineer and you think, hey, I'm new to this. I don't think I might qualify for that, right? Because clearly you're looking for this big thing, an engineer that might have to know, a lot of math, right? So sometimes that's one of the things that comes across with engineering, is that maybe you just have to know really a lot of math and you have to be really good at math. And no, not the case at all.
So then what can I look for in a job posting to understand what role I'm qualified for? If I should look beyond, the job title, software engineer, web developer, software developer, like how does Sabio help students understand those kind of nuances and figure out which roles they're qualified for and what job postings to look at?
Well, you really do have to go into the description and go into the specific skills and tools that the job requires, right? In combination with the years of experience, which, someone coming out of school, coming out of a boot camp, whether it's a boot camp or a 2-year, 4-year degree, these people aren't necessarily going to get engineering roles, right? Not real ones. So look at the skill sets. Look at like, okay, I need you to do React. Is it JavaScript again, React on the front end? Is it JavaScript on the back end? Because even a lot of JavaScript, even though there's JavaScript that runs on the server side node, a lot of that is still going to fall into what some people would just say it's development, it's application development, API development, which again, a lot of API development today is not engineering, if we're going to use the most purest sense of that word. Looking at the skill sets, the tools is the number one thing to look for. And since we did talk about all the different little things in the job description, right? If for some reason you don't have 100% of those things, don't let that scare you off as well. Depending on who you are, you're going to be more apt to apply to a job if you check off more boxes. Don't be afraid to send out a resume for jobs that, you don't check off all the boxes for. Those things are often wish lists.
Do you see this distinction like contributing to some inequality in the industry, or like what kind of drives you to have an
Well, yeah,
opinion
I
about
think
this.
that what really like the little thing in my side is that people try to create this hierarchy, and they try to. I talk about developers in the industry a lot. Like, hey, we do a lot of open source. Come and look at all this great stuff that we do. Go look at my GitHub. But don't try this at home, right? Like, for some reason, like once you get in, like you become part of like some special elite club where we can do this stuff, but not you. And the titles is one of the first things to talk about. The titles. I mean, a lot of companies beef up your titles to make you seem a little bit more important. And a lot of people criticize them from the outside, but once they get in, people start saying like, "No, I have a fancy title. Like I must be, somehow maybe smarter than you. Maybe there's all these again, like you said, there's biases, there's barriers, right? I don't like those gates. I don't like the idea that some people are going to look at a job and say, well, it says it's an API engineer, and I'm an API developer, right? That's how we've been talking about here. Well, no, it's the same thing. Go look at what they do, and you'll see that you do that too. So, and sometimes when people talk about themselves and they try to see the job description and see themselves in the job description, they have a hard time. Little imposter syndrome. Everyone's got little imposter syndrome. Man, I'm not an engineer. I don't do optimization like that. No, you do. You absolutely do. So we try to train them, and we try to talk to them to talk themselves up a little bit, because people in the industry have no problem talking themselves up, right? Someone in the industry came up with the term React engineer, but in engaging in the my name is more important than your name is a silly thing.
That is really, really good advice. So I think that is the perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Gregorio, for joining and explaining the differences between software engineering and web development. I feel like my main takeaway is that in a vacuum, there may be these differences, but in reality, these job titles are kind of used to create this false hierarchy in the tech industry. So if you are watching this video and thinking about becoming a developer or an engineer, be sure to, remember to look past those job titles and instead, look at the job postings and the descriptions and what the company is actually looking for. And if you're watching this video, if you're tuning in, thanks for being here, and leave us a comment and let us know which career paths you'd like us to dive into next on the Course Report YouTube channel. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Gregorio.
Thank you, Liz.